Right, we're live. Good afternoon, Jeff. Very good afternoon, Jonathan. We missed you the last couple of sessions, Jeff and I. It's good to see you again.
Yeah,
Got some decent audio today.
Yeah, nice to be stabilized.
Yeah. So what we're going to be looking at chapter 6 today, and Jeff, you've been having some thoughts about the beginning of this chapter, which sound like it's going to be fertile ground to start a conversation. So, tell us about your impressions just of reading the first paragraph or so of this chapter.
Well, I'm sort of two minds because so he starts off by describing that we are not the world as we perceive the world. The world is outside us, and we are sort of foreign to the world, if you will, or abstract from the world as a whole, and then describes that we are that we are that we are by the nature of what the processes going on in our living frame, that we in fact are part of the world and part of the cosmos. We're not synonymous with it, but we are in deeply inherently involved in it. But that's not our experience, right? So I can't speak for other times. Like I think if we're talking about the evolution of consciousness, and we could really start to get a feel for the way, say, Pherecydes and Pythagoras experienced the world, then I could sort of intellectually and somewhat emotionally have sympathy for the way in which they describe their experience as being not separate from the world. But axiomatically, like, it's not just a feeling. We believe in our bones that we're not part of the world. And it's a pretty radical description in a work of philosophy, not a spiritual perfect, it's not a religious work. It's not a work of it's not a propositional work. It's not proposing something. It is a work that is meant to prove, in a sense, that we are part of the world. And this is a disjointed moment for me in the beginning of this, because I'm with this process the whole way up to this point, as relates to the way in which he's moving us, or is evoking this experience of that which is universal within us. But it's still a monad experience for me. It's still an individual experience, and this is indeed this chapter is called Human Individuality. And so, as an individual, I truly do experience myself as separate from the world, and I believe that to be the case, even though I don't want to believe it, in other words, I actually, I'm conflicted. I'm really torn into two, and I'm yes. Jonathan asked the question in the chat: Is this the higher and lower self? Is it? Yeah, and so yeah, I guess so. I guess that's what it would be. But again, that's a sort of abstract notion to me.
Yeah. But the conflict I feel as well, because I wish to be connected to the world because I feel so divorced from her, and yet at the same time, I'm innerly kind of like, no, stay away, because don't encroach on me, don't tread on me. Like, this is my land. So yeah, but and you said that he proves this absolute unity, and I don't know philosophically if it's the wrong terminology, but in a sense he just simply demonstrates it, and just in a line, and it's there, and for all of us to experience, or not be able to, because it's
I've got something to add there, because I think all he's doing is he's radically changing our perspective. There is nobody that can deny that the universe as a whole exists and that we live within that universe. What we're not used to doing is looking at our life from that perspective. So just because the thought suddenly flashed into my mind, it's interesting. Often in dreams we see ourselves from outside. At least I do. Let's put it like that.
I wish I did.
And we might be able to thread in here a little bit of what David was saying yesterday in the conversation. But there's nobody that can deny it's like the world is the universe. The world is a complete organism, and we live within that organism. And then he says, so like this is the challenging bit is when he says along the lines of he says, on closer inspection, this individualistic perspective that we all recognize in life turns out to be non-existent. That's the difficult bit, because that's our real experience. But nobody, I think, if they think about it for more than 30 seconds, can deny that the perspective that Steiner gives is also a true perspective, but it's one that we're not used to.
Yeah. Can we just back up just 1 second? Because what's the problem? The problem is we feel I'm here and the world's there. And he says, on closer inspection, we are not to be sure the outer things, but we belong with the outer things to one and the same world. And so there's no problem saying, how come I can see the tree there and then I have an image of it in me? Well, how the hell does that happen? How does the tree get into me? And he's saying, it doesn't matter. It's all one thing.
That's right. We are run through by the world processes. I think I perceive as my subject is run through by the stream of universal world processes. And in that sense, exactly what you're talking about, Jonathan, it's not like something foreign has to enter into us. We are part of that.
But the existential experience is so strong that when I stand and I look at the tree, it's not fucking in me. Right? It's over there.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not
but on closer inspection,
right. We're all getting excited here. Carry on, Jeff. I've got a counter argument. So's Jonathan. Go for it.
It's not. It takes an intellectual leap actually to say, well. And he does this well. He says, I might be yelling right now, I'm kind of excited. He does this where where's my dulcet tones? They're there.
That's right. Yeah,
he does this that we don't need to have this notion that it makes an imprint on my my inner being or my soul or even my physiology, that treeness somehow is alive. The processes that our trees are in a part of a world process that's alive in me, and that's what he's saying, and that there's no model of how I come to know the tree that will replace the actual processes that are the living aspects of the living processes, say, of the tree that are also living in me. That's the way I heard that. Now, it's still not my experience.
Okay, go you first, Jonathan.
Well, it's the way I take it. What is being said here is not it's living in the same process in the tree is also living in me. It's just because that, to me, still puts a distinction between the tree and me, not in me. It's just that there's no inner and outer. There's only one process.
Yeah, but where's our focus? When we're talking about this in our conversation, is our focus on the percept or the concept? I mean, we're going to go for the middle ground in a second with the mental image, but he's pointing to the aspect we're not used to thinking about, to recognizing that is there. Because actually what he's been telling us in the last couple of chapters is you don't see this sounds stupid, I know. You don't see with your eyes, you see with your thinking. Thinking is that universal process, but when we individualize it out onto the object that is outside, it's like us from a physiological perspective, from a thinking perspective, because it's a concept that's arisen within us, it isn't outside us. In that sense, that's my understanding of what he's saying here. Do you follow? Do you disagree, or do you agree?
I agree.
Or are you just shell shocked and thinking, "What the hell is he talking about?"
If I understood you in the sense that there's that thinking, what we obtain to through thinking is us kind of plugging into that reality in its purity, and it starts to reconnect all the fractured others that we otherwise have in our perceptions. So, reality is a continuum, but we get it all fractured into separated pieces.
Yeah, that's the conceptualizing phase. Absolutely. But I think what he's getting at here is like, if we understand how thinking is involved in the perceiving process, then because these concepts that we're seeing things with are universals, they're part of a whole. And so can somebody select take over? I've got something coming in here. I'm just going to blank out for a minute. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay. Jeff, do you understand what he's saying? Because he's saying that it seems to be saying that our percepts are formed by our thinking. In a sense, there's a continuum. Whereas I was sort of distinguishing percepts as something different from thinking. I agree with him, but only like in the whole tide of time. I think our percepts are kind of like congealed thinking, you could say.
I agree with both of those things, actually. I think that the percept is there by virtue of thinking, and but that thinking. So again, this is an intellectual statement.
But do you mean that the current percept now? So,
as I stand before a tree, there's a percept tree,
and you only see that with thinking.
And I see it. I see it's an object in my field of awareness, and but intellectually, what I know now more than ever is that whatever I call thinking in me is the thing that is responsible for that tree.
Yes, but I as I understand it, there's that relationless aggregate. So there's like smudges of color, there's movement. So we could sort of form the tree out of all of those, but are not they, like original percepts that think untouched by thinking, except in the sense perhaps of as I was saying, if the history of the world is a sort of congelation of thinking in reverse.
Well, yes. So I refer to the conversation about Ian McGilchrist yesterday in the book group, and somebody made this slight maybe warning that you want to be careful about saying the brain is the bifurcated aspect that thinks or perceives or does any of what we're describing as a epistemological process. It's not bound to the brain. The brain is a symbol if you stay alive to it, rather than a model. So as a symbol, it's a gesture of the way in which these polarities play out, but also interweave. And so I think what we're saying is that the percept is a step in the process of cognition that does the differentiation process in order to find a conscious relationship with the way everything is unified, is universal, in order to be that which is universal, because we are separate, and we know better than that. but we don't believe it.
Yeah.
And this process is a process of shedding belief, and allowing concepts to become perceptual organs. I would suggest.
Yeah, I agree. But I just want to sort of hold track a minute. So what you're saying, it seems to me, is that if percepts are the part that separates out within cognition, and then the other half is the part that brings them together, then it seems to me that you're saying that our biological organism through which, say, color. Oh, I see what you're saying. So you can just forget the biological organism, but nevertheless, I don't. Yeah, maybe, because what I'm saying is the biological organism another way of saying thinking? It's just kind of like a slowed down thinking.
If we're to understand the biological organism, truly understand it in a non-materialistic, dualistic, absolute modeling, predictability, probability, all of that, all of those problem epistemologies that we're riddled with. If we really want to understand it, then I would suggest, I guess I'm making a claim, that we would have to be able to read the biological gestures that are semiotic, right?
What does that mean?
Means that they're language.
What does that mean? What's language?
It means that it's it means that the wisdom
it's difficult, Jonathan.
But he knows what he knows what he means, but I don't yet.
No. Those are great questions.
Sorry,
actually.
Apologize.
So
no.
Language is the articulation out of a spiritual process of thinking. This is why I don't like when people say, it's just words, or that you just make up words. Then let's see how you do there, because it's not going to go well. It's a continuum. It's not. My teeth aren't utility tools. They grow morphologically out of my organism, right? And so biology is a profound gestural description of that which is in other dimensions, saying the same thing, so to speak, right?
But take away biology, then if we're in other dimensions, are we still not perceiving and thinking? And then what are they?
They just have they have ontologically different
biologies, languages,
yeah.
laws.
Spheres. They have their own rules to the game, so to speak.
Yeah, they're speaking just their own language.
It's like what he talks about when at the beginning of chapter 1, when he talks about religious knowing, artistic knowing, and scientific knowing. They all represent different forms of wisdom in different dimensions. Say, we don't even have to go into like spiritual dimensions that have their own furnitured reality. Water behaves one way and dirt behaves another way. There are so many realms of existence that you could come to engagement with and understand that there is where the unity is where they're all expressing the same thing. Right. So neurobiologically, something is expressed that is, but you have to read it. Like it's like reading a text. But what's more directly expressed through music.
So,
but it's a continuum, right?
Yeah.
Music and neurobiology are continuum.
Yeah. So there's neurobiology and music, and then my mental pictures thereof, and then the air, and they're all expressing the same thing in their own individual way. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I didn't know that's what I was saying until you so beautifully put it before me. And it makes me think of whoever brought up Goethe's idea that there's only one idea, right? And everything is a conciliant expression of that idea.
It's from GA1 and GA2, Theory of Knowledge and Introduction to Goethe's Scientific Writings, where it's like Steiner discusses this idea. So it's really good background reading. I want to clear up a point here, because, and this will actually feed into later when we actually start talking about feeling and the relationship to the individual, who's like the center of the topic of this chapter, is percept is a way of a concept gaining content. So when we look out into the relationless aggregate, then we see nothing until we start thinking about it. We receive all the impressions, but we cannot identify anything. So it's this activity of thinking that enables us to do it. We experience that thinking as happening within ourselves, whereas Steiner is talking, this is a universal activity. It's not an individual activity. And from that perspective, that is why for him it's like it's absurd to think that there's this problem of getting to know the tree that is outside me, because my thinking is a universal activity, and the tree as well as myself, because the thinking transcends the self. It's the creator of object and subject, and from that perspective, it really is as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. It's, well, if I'm using thinking, it's like as the way of knowing. It's the only way of knowing the world through thinking. But through using thinking to know the world, I'm automatically involved in a universal process. Therefore, the tree is part of, not outside of me, it's within that whole process.
Yeah, and then 1 + 1 = 1.
Yeah. But because I thought I heard something different when you were talking about it.
It's interesting. You said that percepts give thinking content, and words are fantastic. Content. A tent is somewhere where you live, like the Israelites. If they're nomadic, it doesn't have to be fixed. Together. Words are fantastic, aren't they?
Yes, I love the tent words too, the 10 words, the tongue words, the language words, language, lingua, tongue, tent.
Wow.
Intent. So if you take language as it was lived at a different time, there weren't nouns. It was verb. It was verb all shot through with verb. So the word tent isn't the structure. It's the tension
Wow.
of
Yeah.
two things in. Guess another 10 word is entwinement. So two things in when you say, this is the way I love the word symbol, because it comes from symbolos, which means within the throes of. It's the ball. It's the ball. You don't hold the ball, walk around with the ball. Like when my kid was like just a couple years ago, 5 years old. He's 7 now. He would have a ball and it would be like, it's my ball. I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, that's not what balls are for. Balls are meant to be thrown, and that's what entwinement means. The intent is to be entwined, and so percept and concept are content. That's really powerful.
Sorry, guys, I'm going to have to deflate your bubbles. I'm a language nerd, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to rip into you here a little bit.
Oh, good.
Content has nothing to do with tense. It comes from con and tenere, which means to have, and tenere, to have, to hold. And
you don't know the poetry of it, then.
You're wrong. You're wrong.
Using
you know
etymology
better than we do, but
you're using. Let me finish.
Let me finish. Where does the word tendon?
Let me finish.
Tendon.
So from your point there about poetically, I totally agree with you, Jonathan. You're absolutely right. As a way of expressing meaning. But if you then try to say it's like the roots of language as the reason for your explanation, that's where you're. In Sweden, we say, you're out in the middle of the forest.
Forget the roots. Where can language go? What can she do?
Anyway, back to symbol. So what's the etymology of that? It's balin, which is like ancient Greek, which means to throw. Sim means to throw together. And you've got the opposite, which is dia, which means to throw through, or throw, can also mean throw apart. Diabalin, which is actually also the root of the devil, which this was an interesting segue, totally unplanned. But we also started talking about the intellect and reason yesterday, because Steiner here introduces in this chapter the idea of intuition, the difference between an intuition and a concept. And this is another key for me, that doesn't mean it is the only important thing, but for me, this is it's like a key part of this chapter, where a concept, although he doesn't flesh it out here, he fleshes it out in other parts, that concept really is like an individual, it's like cutting up the world into little pieces. It's like this diabalene, this process of dividing the world. It's like the Seth of ancient mythology that wants to cut up Osiris. That's the intellectual part of thinking. But then we've also got thinking has another aspect. It doesn't just divide up the world. It doesn't just cut up the world into concepts that we can identify a tree and then chop down that tree into leaves and branches and twigs, and it's like all the different structures. There's also another faculty of thinking, which is the reunification, seeing the whole out of which it's like out of which all of these parts fall, the harmony of the whole out of which these parts fell. And there's a strong awareness of this in idealist philosophy that goes to to Kant, and at least back to Kant. That's where I'm read up to, where there's an important difference needs to be taken into account when we're trying to understand this thinking process, because this is what these first 7 chapters are about, isn't it? What is this thinking activity in us? And here, one of those parts that's being indicated and not stated explicitly is you've got the chopping up part, dicing the world up into bits, the Seth part, and then you've got the
reason for being, bringing it all back together again.
But the reason, exactly, and this is the Isis part that's trying to put together Osiris, if I'm using Egyptian mythology, is trying to reconstruct the whole after it's been broken down into its component parts.
And the Manichaean thing, in that, we as human beings, our mission task is our reason for being is to help bring all this shattering back together again.
Can we take a half step back?
Go for it.
You used the term diavolene. Is that what you said? Diavolene?
Yeah. That's where the word devil comes from.
And where does the word individual come from? Individual.
I think it's non-separable.
You think?
Yeah, dividere is to divide, and in can be like the opposite of.
Is within the divide. It's not denying the divide.
Not non-divisible.
But also within the divide, because if you're talking about a verb and not a noun, and not something that's described or propositional, but something that's action, then the experience of being within the divide is also the experience of being within the divine. You could say it could be individual as well. The linkage of those two words are tight, divine and divide. So I also am calling into question your glossing over on this content, because you said yourself that the tenere is holding together, and that's what a tendon does. That's what the tension is. It's the holding together within the divide. It's holding the Lucy and Harry, on at the center, right? And so this and who plays the starring role here? The mental picture. The mental picture inserts itself in the divide between percept and concept, and either it's a living mental picture, or it's a place where, as you said in the talk in the conversation yesterday, where concepts go to die. But it's also the place where concepts come to resurrect and hold the divide.
Is our individuality just like a conglomeration of mental pictures, individualized concepts? Is that what our individuality is?
Oh, I think it's much more than that. But yeah, I think that's part of what it is. Yeah, I think that's how it establishes itself as a knowing, doing, concrete reality that stands independently and freely in the world between that which is differentiated and that which is coming together. If everything was just come together for us, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, right? I mean, that was our experience at the first part of this chapter as we began this first part of this conversation. It's like it's a sort of agitating experience, right?
How? Where's feeling in that? Is feeling like, is that part of the world continuum?
In as much as individuals are part of the world continuum.
But if I'm feeling like, I have a feeling about, I have some mental pictures, and I obtain some feeling in relation to it, and that's relevant to me. How can that have relevance to the rest of the world continuum?
Because how? Because isn't the right next step. How about that feeling is a potentially it's a soul activity that is that describes our independence at the level of soul that is not yet permeated by spirit.
Yeah, but
but can be permeated by spirit, and when it's permeated by spirit, it becomes it becomes inspiration, actually, with a capital I. But it becomes a perceptual organ at a level of pure information, say. So that's my claim about feeling and its role in the mental picture, is that when feeling is spiritualized, the mental picture first starts to become imaginal. It becomes that which is imagination, and then we'll see in chapter 12 the mental picture makes a roaring re-entrance into ethics, because you can't have an ethical stance in the world, a meaningful, true, good, and beautiful in the way you could unpack all three of those words, unless your concepts are individualized. In other words, unless they're mental pictures. So if staying just within philosophy of freedom, we don't have to say imaginal with a capital I or inspiration with a capital I, but cognitive science has this for us already, that the mental picture is the imagination, and it's up for grabs.
Steiner's defining it very differently, at least in my ears, to how you're defining it there, Jeff, because he's saying it's concept and percept where they meet in the human being and where the concept is retained in an individual form. It's an expression of this universe, of this concept, or it obviously can be an idea as well. It's like a still picture of something. It's something that's lost its life. This is what I'm taking out of how he's defining the mental picture, before he says, like, how do we get out of this? How do we get out of this roadblock? So I'm finding I'm struggling a little bit to reconcile what you described with what I've been what he's saying in chapter 6. Any ideas?
This showdown has been a forecasted showdown for early on in the movie. That is this conversation. I've said a few times.
I'd be waiting. And I was looking over there, and he was looking
more like the good, bad, and the ugly, rather than but we'll see. Right, we're not there yet, and I do agree with you that the mental picture at this stage is a container for the potential for concepts to go to die or something like that. Just like Goethe said about that ink on the page is the death of feeling, or the death of thinking. But when the reader picks it up, the reader then brings it back to life. And it's the same thing with the mental picture, because the mental picture keeps you in touch with the percept, which is always changing, right? And it keeps you in touch with the concept, because you're using your conceptual intuition to select from this body of concepts that you're getting from the experience in relationship to the percept. So the more rich your perceptual experience is, the more content, meaningful content, the intuitional field out of which you can select your concepts are, and that still plays out in the mental picture.
When I was the picture that's on screen at the moment, when I was looking at that, I was reminded of when you were talking about Narcissus last time. Do you remember telling the story about that? It's this picture of something falling in love with itself, and this is the problem. This is one way for me of describing the problem with what the mental image is. It's and it doesn't just have to be a problem. It's a problematic aspect of the mental image, if I leave it like that, because it's an own creation. And if it's an own creation, to what extent does it tell me about the true idea, the real world? If I've got all of these mental images of the world, and that's what I know, instead of these concepts are like invisible beings that's like enable us to recognize something, but it's a little bit like platonic ideals. This is why I've got this picture down here, this idea that's like concepts are something that we don't know directly. We know them through mental concepts, and also when we recognize how they help us describe reality, both reality outside of our skin and reality inside of our skin. So this Narcissus picture that you reimagined for us last week, I think is also how my current understanding of how this mental image is problematic. Aren't we just staring at ourselves when we're looking at these mental images because we've created them?
Is the universe staring at itself?
Are the mental pictures the surface water? One can then learn to look through the surface and see the living waters of life. Right? That's the cure for Narcissus, and you could say this is one.
Because Narcissus, at the end of the day, is formed out of water and the earth that holds the water. Oh, sorry, I thought you were checking your phone in reality, so I was filling in.
He's looking himself. Do you look good there, Jeff?
Oh yeah. No, our technologies are a externalized mental picturing, you could say, from a McLuhan standpoint. They're a potential ability to truly view ourselves, yet we're transfixed by them. And I wouldn't even say Narcissus fell in love with his image. I don't really think that's the case, because I think there's a mental picture that was himself, and he didn't know it was himself, and so became transfixed. He couldn't see through because he denied the soul 3 times. Her love was professed to him, and he at first denied, ignored, then denied, and then completely denied the existence of the self, the soul. And so where is the soul? Where is the self? Where is the individuation occurring? It's happening in the mental picture, where the relationship between percept and concept are becoming individualized. Remember, he also says that, and if we go back to our conversation about where percepts sort of, how there's a cognitive element to them, or there's thinking that gives rise to the percept itself, as a differentiation process. It's the first process. You could say that if we're transfixed by the percept
do you mean
side.
observation there, Jeff? Is that what you're referring to when you say that? Observation as opposed to perception?
Well, you gain, you don't, there's already with the percept, there's already a differentiation, which means there's already something cognitive about the percept. That's kind of what Jonathan and I were touching on when you stepped away for a minute. And that's what we thought you were saying, that the percept itself presupposes a kind of thinking. And it may not be our thinking, but it certainly does prefigure thinking. So what I wanted to get to, so this may be correct technically or incorrect, but what I wanted to get to is that he also says in this chapter that not only is mental picture an individualized concept, it's an individualized percept. In that it always is attending to the particular of the percept, and so that's sort of the percept keeps it real in relationship to. So otherwise, you're off in just mental pictures and thinking, and you have no perceptual feeling for what's going on around you. So this is another way in which feeling plays a role within the field of the mental picture as an individualizing process. I think of the mental picture picturing, not so much not a static mental picture in this case.
I'm just Jonathan's just joining us from there. Okay. He's I don't know what's happening. I'll let him back in when I see what he's up to. Okay. So you're using percept in a far wider way than I experience it. There, the individualized concept. There's in that sense we're in complete agreement, because that's what Stein is saying. A mental image is, but an individualized percept. I'm trying to put together where he's talking about in previous chapters, like the difference between observation and perception, because observation is perception plus concepts. So that's why we can direct our attention to certain things, because thinking has become part of the process in observation as we bring concepts to bear on what we're perceiving. And I'm not getting it to square in my head what you're saying with what I'm.
Well, perception and percept are two different things.
Perception is the act, and a percept is that which is seen, or that which is experienced.
Which is the result of the observation, is a percept.
No,
right?
I disagree.
At first.
I disagree.
Well,
you can't have that recognition without thinking.
right,
Percept is a nothing.
but with observation alone, assuming that thinking is part of that, then how does the percept arise? Otherwise, first of all, second of all, it's not until we take the percept into our interior reflective experience that that we create new percepts as relates to the way in which our organization is being altered by the experience of reflecting on a percept. And the container is the mental picture, because that's what holds the memory. Say, he doesn't use the term memory, but he says, you have a percept, and that percept is particular. The mental picture trains is referential to that percept, and then that cognitive process goes into an interior experience where it's possible, at least, to notice the way that percept is altered the percept of your subjective self, and so then it becomes overcome in that way as a percept, and a concept joins it. So percept and concept are conjoined then. And I have no doubt that in real life, when I observe something, I've got a whole conceptual framework to choose from to see what I'm looking at. But I'm still looking at an object that is differentiated in the world, unless I'm already at the point at which, while I'm observing something, I'm able to see all of the connections at once. And if I were able to do that, then again, we wouldn't be having this conversation. What do you say?
Trying to find some way of expressing how I'm viewing the things. I think this relationless aggregate, which again, just for like more as like as an information here, I think it's in Theory of Knowledge. I think it's chapter 6, but it might be chapter 4. So GA2. He spends multiple pages describing this word experience, Erfahrung in German, which then becomes converted into this relationless aggregate that we meet in chapter 4. And I think where I am at with my own thinking at the moment is this is a key idea to grapple with, and it sounds contradictory there, because we're thinking about thinking. He's by describing this relationless aggregate, it's like its nature. What we're trying to do is we're trying to put ourselves in a pre-thinking state, something which we cannot do. So we have to, it's like, summon our internal energies to say, what would the world look like without thinking? And then he leads us forward and says, like, it is perfectly reasonable to say, well, actually, we can't say anything without thinking, because we only know things through thinking. So all of these sense impressions, the tree, when I have thinking, I see the tree. When I don't have thinking, I see all of the impressions that a thinking person would call a tree, but I wouldn't see the tree itself. It would just it would flow into the rest of the background, because it's been undefined. And so this relationless aggregate and this pure experience prior to thinking, I in my mind, it becomes this canvas which is indescribable. There's nothing that we can say about it until the activity of thinking begins to occur in us. But that thinking activity is it's an activity that both creates us as individuals, and also enables us to recognize this inner activity reflected in the outside world. So in that, if that is a correct understanding, or a somewhat correct understanding of what Steiner's trying to communicate, then when we're looking at the outside world, all we are doing is seeing ourselves, so our own thinking nature, our own limited thinking nature, reflected back on ourselves. And that was the link I was making to your picture of Narcissus. I can't remember the correct pronunciation, but let's call him Narcissus. That we believe we're seeing an objective reality outside of us, but the perspective that Steiner is describing at the beginning of this chapter, which I also share, is that we are seeing our own inner lives reflected back to us from the outside world. It's like an extreme form of projection. Do you know what I mean? In the most real sense, that quite literally, if I'm not capable of having, let's say I'm not capable of love. Let's say I'm totally incapable of love, then I will never recognize it in the outside world. It's in that slight dramatic sense that I mean that our inner lives, what we are capable of thinking, the concepts we are capable of creating within ourselves, if it hasn't been created inside ourselves, then we will never see it in the outside world. It's that relationship that I see going on. Has anything that I said gone against what you're saying, or do you see it differently?
I can see based on what you've said, how we maintain a different perspective, and why it's possible for us to maintain a different perspective at this point. Because I don't take the relationless aggregate quite the same way that you do, operationally speaking. Because I don't think I'm with Lost Scrapbook on this one. I don't think he's kidding around. But I think what we're forgetting is that there's the aggregate part, and the aggregate is the all the differentiated field of percepts, and we have to have cognition in order to discern one thing from another. Now that also suggests a pattern, but it appears at first as relationless, because we haven't used thinking yet to weave together the relationships. And it's the in-between that thinking does, that connects all of the percepts, but also my percept of my concepts and the percept that I've had in the outer world through going through a contemplative and reflective process, in order then, hopefully, to some extent, I think this is what Goethe was actually able to achieve, is through work and painting and drawing nature and observing nature without presumption. He saw the way at first he was drawn to Linnaeus, and because there was some categorical stuff he could get a hold on, but there were a bunch of concepts that weren't related to each other in meaningful ways. And so he threw that out and said, I can't have preconceived notions about what these aspects are, but these aspects are there through virtue of cognition, but I don't yet have how they're connected. And then he works and works and works, and then he comes to the point at which he experiences presumably something like time-lapse photography of the way in which the polarities and the way in which the plant then forms, and the way in which
Expansion,
that's
contraction, expansion, contraction.
and then that becomes an archetypal experience that he can somewhat explain, but that Steiner's whole epistemology is meant to put ground underneath, say. That's not that last statement isn't necessarily related to, well, it's not unrelated either, but so
when
this is, you see,
when I hear
see
you
where
describe it like that, when I hear you describe it like that, I hear a strong emphasis on the reason aspect of thinking. But prior to reuniting all of these parts into the idea of, let's say, the plant here, the other side of thinking is this breaking down, this it's like individualization, this chopping up, dicing up the world into different concepts. So understanding what the whole is comprised of.
this goes back to the problem of the potential combinatorial explosion. If we don't take something, suppress something in ourselves, and that's something, what that something is it's not perfectly apparent to me at this moment. For this is from Riddles of Philosophy, that we suppress something in ourselves that would give us the relationships, the total relationships of the aggregated reality, but it would blow us apart to have that experience. And so there's a process that we need to go through, which is an individuation process, so that we can be not just have intellectual framework for how to view the world, but we can become more and more become the world that of that which we already are, but we've separated ourselves from as an existential reality, as we dealt with at the beginning of this. The feeling of it is undeniable that we're separate from the world. And that's a bit of a what you could say, if you're pulling in other terms. He uses the word transference. He uses the word projection. He's prefiguring psychology in a certain way, I believe, and or defining what psychology could be. But there's also here a what do you say, a defense mechanism, so that we're not so that we so that we can maintain ourselves while also experiencing this universal.
I'm you use the phrase combinatorial explosion several times. Do you want to unpack that a little bit? What do you mean by it, and how does it relate to what we're talking about here?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to describe it, as I understand it. Now, I could be using it incorrectly as relates to the technical way it's used in cognitive science, but it doesn't really matter for this purpose. What I mean is that the sheer complexity of the world, if one could experience the way everything was connected, would blow you apart. I would suggest it would. Let me tell a religious story, so we can. So say you have the ability to okay. So say you had Christ consciousness, right? And in this is going to be a little bit aberrant, but I'm really not concerned. I really think we have opportunity to have a higher form of synthesis between you and I, because we definitely disagree on the mental picture. But I don't but I think we have tons to learn from each other in relationship to this. So I'm going to do this an esoteric move I would do, that tune it out if you'd like.
And for the sake of the audience, Jeff, so let's start by unpacking a little bit what you mean by Christ consciousness, because I think we're going to be like essentially in agreement, but so that it's stated before you then go on to talk about the combinatorial explosion.
Well,
what is we've got to be humble in this. We've got like approximations as to what we think it might be, but
right. I don't know how to put words to Christ consciousness, but if you saw it, if it were, say, Steiner refers to Christ as the Lord of Karma. Well, what does that mean? It means that when that consciousness looks at an individual, it knows every aspect of its life, lives on Earth previous, and the destiny that they're meant to resolve in their process. This is why he says to the person along the poolside, "Pick up your bed and walk." It's not your destiny to lie prone next to this pool. I've seen your destiny, and it's not it. So you need to pick up your bed and walk. You need to pick up your cross and go through the process of fulfilling your destiny. Because I did it, and what you're facing is nowhere near what I had to face, something like that. So, but as relates now specifically to, say, combinatorial. So say you had that consciousness and you had it for every single individual on Earth, and you also knew you also were able to live within all of the realms of nature, and including the material realm. So that when you died, you spent a few days in the consciousness of matter, which is no consciousness at all until you've passed through it. So, excuse me. The more I talk, the more I cough. So here's what I want to say about the Christ from a karmic, from the way in which that is described as I understood it.
Mm-hmm.
That the life
overwhelming experience,
yeah. Well, but also who it was that was Jesus, say. And this is going to be out there for people who are following philosophy discussion, but this person had to have, in order to contain this absolute multiplicity and unicity, this being that would be able to do this, be both profoundly individual and profoundly all at onceness, say, be part of that which we're trying to get a part of, to get our little corner of it and get in there. He had to have the body of he had to have subtle bodies that were that had enough wisdom and experience in the world that would not blow when the Christ consciousness entered the body, wouldn't physically explode the body. And that's what I think of as the combinatorial explosion from a religious standpoint. Say, I don't have the language other than the language coming out of like complexity theory, like, right, there's a verse, as opposed to a world that's complicated. We live in a complex, infinitely interpenetrating world. But imagine that that was a world that you saw all the connections. Well, it would destroy you. Like I get some insights, and every once in a while it scare the hell out of me, and they're minor insights, just like a self-awareness that maybe you watch a film or something and it makes you reflect on who you are and who you've been, and it's like, I don't know if I can take all this right now, that sort of thing. But imagine that it was all of the connections that exist. That would be combinatorial explosion.
It's interesting what you're saying, because it's highly pertinent, I think, to the whole my understanding on an essential part of the spirit of the philosophy of freedom. What is it? It's a careful ascent into these higher worlds. That it really is the idea that that through conscious thinking, the more we permeate our own thinking with an awareness of what it is, the less these experiences that will come to us as we try to grow further into the world, into its complexity, don't become crushing experiences. And this is one of the challenges that we do face when reading this book, because on the surface it's a philosophy book, and so like philosophy has like its own baggage, its own reputation of what type of issues it can, what type of questions it can talk about. But Steiner is he's not saying it explicitly here, but in the rest of anthroposophical literature, that this is the path. You've used the phrase, it's like the I can't remember how you phrase it exactly, but the incarnation of the Holy Spirit or something like that. Or it's something that's opening us up to something that's far greater, far bigger than we're possible of far bigger than we're capable of imagining now. And that is exactly with the philosophy of freedom and careful multiple readings and multiple conversations where you try to clear up, it's like create clarity in what thinking is and the relationship of thinking to perception and mental pictures, that this growth out into this enormous experience becomes it's possible to retain a sense of oneself rather than losing oneself. I really did like what David said in the conversation yesterday when I brought up the question of some people's experience of intense drug experiences, how you have to, it's like, yeah, he described how he had to have it, his like layers of his eyes like peeled off of him. You can tell he's been through one hell of an experience. It's like that ripping apart that you're describing there, and that again, this is on faith at the moment that I'm acting here. It's like thinking that spiritual science, the philosophy of freedom, is a way of consciously managing being part of that process that doesn't involve the destruction of the I.
I would say that it doesn't allow, that it protects, it helps us build a vessel that protects what the I, the true I, would in a weak vessel, the I's experience. I think the I is indestructible. If I'm thinking of the essence of what it is to be me, a human being, and me, both of those things. And it's in this work, he refers to individuals as a species in and of themselves, and he means that technically, right? So there's a controversial statement, if there ever was one, within the framework of this work. And so I see the mental picture as part of the vessel building. It's part of the way in which we're creating a container for us to maintain an individuated experience that is also a universal experience. And that the reason for that, is that we are meant to be, not meant to think, have conceptual frameworks about, or those are meant to, the conceptual frameworks only allow for if not believed, right? If they don't become models or belief systems or speculation that one gets lost in. In other words, if they don't become the shadows on the cave wall, or the Narcissus experience of the reflection, then they are pathways for us to actualize. And to me, the place where that actualization is happening is in in what we're calling the mental picturing, in the individuation that just is drawing together the two, the conceptual and the perceptual world.
Okay, so I think perhaps we're getting closer to where it's like very different in opinion. And I think I can draw in another part of this chapter, which is also one of those shocking parts. He suddenly starts again. We're just in the first couple of chapters. He's talking about world creators and world knowers, isn't he? I'll just see if I can find it too. So he's been talking about the tree outside of us, and he said, according to his obvious nature, he says, the percept of the tree lies with my eye in the same hole. Okay, the universal world process calls forth equally the percept of the tree there and the percept of my eye here. Were I a world creator, not a world knower, then object and subject, percept and I, would arise in one act, for they determine each other mutually. What am I seeing going on here that I think has got relevance to what we're talking about here? That when I become as a world creator, he's describing this is a being that has reconfigured like all of the concepts into one total idea, and it's able to create out of that essence. Let's take archetypal plant, Goethe, just as an example to play with here. So you could the plant, the archetypal plant, is not a creator of a world; it's a creator of an element of our world. But he's talking here in like far grander terms, which I'm going to go religious, religious on the audience now, because in the same gospel that you were referring to, John, there, you've got these really problematic phrases like you are gods and you will create I can't remember, you might know this bit better than me, but you will create things even greater than I have created, thanks to it's like the powers that I'm giving you. Perhaps I can find that text next time you're talking to be more specific. So within the core of like the Christian canon, there are these really provocative ideas that we are world creators. We're in the kindergarten stage, or we're even pre-kindergarten stage. But part of that, that's like that really long evolution that Steiner maps out in his spiritual scientific research, is that we have to become world creators and not just merely world knowers. We have to retain our individuality so that we can sort of like create in the world, like out of. There's a lot of screaming going on there. We can create out of the world. We can create the world out of this idea that I'm going to first say lives within us, but then is actually, I would like develop that further and say, which is becomes our essence. And mental images are static versions of these living beings. So if we talk again using an image of the archetypal plant, it's like taking a plant at like a certain point in time in its development and saying that's the plant, rather than understanding that, recognizing that it's this living being that's in continual flux as it goes through these expansion and compression phases to to come to the different. The node is like the essence of the plant, and then it expands to form leaves, and then it contracts, and then it forms petals, and this expansion contraction that Goethe talks about in the archetypal plant. When we have that in complete clarity, it's like within the activity of thinking, then we are capable of creating, just like an architect can build a house. Sorry, not build a house. An architect can design a house, which then people can then go along and work from those instructions. So a mental picture, because of its very nature, because it's been tied down to a snapshot in time, it's in a way dead. It can never capture the essence of a living concept, a living idea. I think that's where we differ, isn't it? Am I describing that correctly?
Yes, that is where we differ, because I think what I'm suggesting is that I'm not talking about a mental picture. I'm talking about mental picturing as part of the process of the individuation that we're talking about. And I think Max had a good example of what I'm talking about. And by the way, I'm thrilled to be wrong about this, because I think basically we're talking about the same things underlying.
We're trying to understand it better, aren't we?
We're talking, but we might be differentiating a different operational process in different ways, say. But so going back to what is it, chapter 2 or chapter 3, when he talks about being able to see in somebody something that 100 people pass by, and then you love them.
End of chapter 2, when he's talking about Hegel and
right. Yeah. So just to bring back in feeling, right? What is feeling's relationship with the mental picture? This is going to be where we're going to end up here in this chapter. And what is feeling's relationship with the process of individuation? And so as I get to know someone, they are in some sense infinitely complex. They are the whole world in a certain sense, and people are way more complicated than the machines we build. We're way more complex. Just our brains, let alone the spiritual content of our, and soul content of our being. So you're never certain that you know someone, or you're never finished knowing them. That's for sure. And if I see the mental picture playing the role of attending to that individual as a evolving perceptual reality that gives me more and more ability to see from their point of view and understand who they are. And I don't mean just intellectual point of view. I mean like literally how they see the world. like that movie City of Lost Children, in a sort of dark sense. The bots were part human and part robots, and they had mechanical eyes, and one was killing another one, or killing a person, and took the eye out and put it in the person, and then murdered them so that they could see their own murderer from the point of view of their own murderer, right? So in a I don't know why I thought of that. Well, it's the same. So what is possible is empathy, and empathy is to me only possible if the mental picture is there as a vessel to continually update the individualized experience of knowing another, say. And we talk abstractly about knowing the world, but when Max brought that in, I was reminded that I often think, what is the potential for human relationships that is if knowledge is limitless, say, and this is what we come to in the next one, and thinking is universal. What's the potential for human relationships, for human intimacy? And maybe this is also the individual collective intelligence problem that everybody's on some level trying to work on.
Yeah, I think it's at the end of the chapter here is there's so much interesting stuff going on at the end of this chapter. One of the things that sticks out, is particularly poignant for me, is this aspect that thinking is a universal activity that lives within us, but it has nothing. It's beyond us. It lives within us, but it's beyond us. It's that which creates our own selves. In that sense, it is completely impersonal, because it's not this subjective activity that is normally associated with what thinking it is. It's that which brings us into a relationship with the world, into a conceptual relationship with the world. So understanding, knowing. But he then is bringing in this further element that we aren't just thinking beings, we are also feeling beings. And later on, we'll be talking about what we are willing beings as well. But he's making the transition here, and that this is the bit that Jonathan, I wish Jonathan was still with us, and perhaps he'll come back after he's dropped off his kids. But the picture that he's presenting is that the thinking, as opposed to the thinking life, which is a universal activity, which is of universal applicability, if we can put it like that, feeling is the dead opposite of that. It becomes my personal, individual liking, disliking, pain or joy experience of the thinking content. And in that sense, it doesn't tell me in itself directly anything about the world. It just tells me about what I am. And if we could stick with the karma, so that you mentioned earlier, it's like, yeah, why am I like I am? Why do I have this characterological disposition that I have, which will also come to later in the book? This is like all my experiential baggage that I've brought with me, that means that I have this feeling relationship to this universal content, this content of thinking activity. And then he takes this, for me, to a really interesting place, because he describes in Wahrhafter Mensch, but I can't remember what it is in English. Let's see. It's like a true. Does he say a true human being, or is a person somebody who? Yeah, a true individual will be the person who reaches highest with his or her feelings into the region of ideals. And this is a way for me of linking up, because he talks about, so I'm mixing ideas here, but we'll come back to that sentence in a second, because he's also described just prior to that a thinking human being is indifferent, if that's the word that he uses. I'm guessing here because I was actually reading it in German, but he talks about the indifference of a pure thinking being. It knows, but it is unmoved by. It has no reason to do anything because it's just knowing. But he's saying that this thinking aspect that is this feeling aspect, sorry, mixing my words here, when this thinking aspect meets my soul and is experienced as a feeling, this is what gives the thought life content. But also that the higher I can ascend in my ideal life, so a full picture of what reality is, the whole idea, the full idea, the complete idea, the universal idea of Goethe, when I live with my feeling life into that thinking experience, that is me becoming a truer individual human being. So linking it up with Christ consciousness that you mentioned earlier, the clearer conception that I can gain of what this Christ consciousness is, and then live myself with my feeling life into that consciousness. According to Steiner, it's like the truer I become as an individual.
I want to pick up a little bit because what he says is if we were just the elements of thinking that were percept, mental picture, and concept, then we would be indifferent to our world. And elsewhere, when talking about, I think it was von Hartmann early in the book, that the argument might be that if you're talking about thinking being like this, there must be willing in it. And he says this is not an argument. This is what thinking is. It is thinking, feeling, and willing. It contains within it feeling and willing. And so what does that mean, right? If that is the case, if it's what makes me individual, but it's also a universal, it's also part of a universal, it's imbued in a universal process, well, then we have the mystery of what this individualization, we don't have it, but we have before us a mystery of what this individualization is, and how important then feeling and mental picturing, the individualizing of the concepts, becomes, and how they become, I would say mental picturing becomes a cognitive process. It becomes a thinking, not just a place where thinking occurs, but not just a place where thinking deposits concepts or images, or a place where the world deposits percepts, right, as particulars, but a place where the picturing itself starts to take on a life of its own through the individualization process. So this is where I come back to the mental picture as potential, in a certain sense, to be a faculty of the imaginal as we know it from Steinerian initiatory processes. That at first it's static. It may be static, but it becomes, through the individualization process, a moving mental picture. It becomes emotional picture, and emotional is emotional, intellectual, all of it in an individualized frame, an independent frame that's developed, because when you take feeling to the highest level of ideals, you're talking about potential. Right? Ideals are that which we are trying to attain to.
So when you describe it like that, so the word that comes to mind to describe that is more imaginative consciousness, which in my understanding is radically different from mental concepts. Are you saying in your world, first of all, do you agree with the statement? And then follow-up question is, do you see them as the same or differently? Because I think
he doesn't use the term mental concepts. He used the term mental picture, mental image.
Okay. He uses Vorstellung, but it's translated in various ways, so we don't need to get pernickety.
Yes, but he keeps coming back to it, and it has a history in philosophy. The notion of mental picture has a history in philosophy. It has to do with worldview. Often, it's like a personal worldview. I have this is the way I see the world, and that it contains whole societies' worldviews are built out of individuals' mental pictures of the way the world works.
Mm-hmm.
So
is that the same as imaginative consciousness for you?
It is the place where imaginative consciousness can be developed. That where the picture is no longer a concept, which is part of the is no longer an intellectual concept, which is somewhat static. It is the interrelationship of all of the concepts moving in motion, but also then being able to train that on the world and see the world emotionally, actually emotionally, not like the misrepresentation of the zoetrope. Right, but this is what Goethe did. He experienced the metamorphosis of the plant in real time, or maybe out of time. I'm not quite sure. And I think
I think we're getting closer to where we see things differently. How we're going to resolve that? That's going to be, or how we use each other's pictures to understand like what is really going on. That's going to be the challenge for us, because in my current understanding, I'm not saying I have the answers here. No, I'm not hearing you're saying that either. We're trying to be open in conversation about where we stand, and through genuine conversation, through genuine dialogue, arriving at hopefully a clearer insight. But I see, from my own current perspective, the imaginative consciousness, I can see why people would call it the same as mental picturing, but for me it's not, because it is something that has been imbued with life itself. So it's no longer something. Has it severed its connection from the percept, because a mental image is concept plus percept, and then what we retain of that in our own inner lives, we use. It's like an after image, almost like of the percept that we had with the concept, and that's what Steiner describes in this and the previous chapter as what a mental image is. Whereas for me, it has developed its own inner life. So it is pure. This is where he uses this idea of pure thinking. This is something that is no longer contaminated, if I can put it like that. It's been informed by the perceptual world. It's been given an initial content, but that content has to be expelled somehow from the system, so that the full life of the concept can live forth in imaginative consciousness instead of just mental imaging. I think that's a rough and ready description of where I am currently in my understanding.
It sounds more like we agree than disagree. I would suggest, from my point of view. I think that what I'm saying incorporates what you're saying. I'm just saying that if you go back, also, I think there's one bit that needs to be picked up there. I'm not saying that you're wrong. And I might be wrong in the way I read it, but there's the bit where the mental picture, the importance of the mental picture as it mediates. It mediates between percept and concept, and it is individualized in relationship to the percept as a design principle almost. And so because there is an individual particular percept in a moment, your understanding of that can change only because you've had a particularized experience of it, and you need to have that experience. So like with getting to know somebody, you have to go back to the source out of which you're trying to become unified with in some way. The desire to be intimate with other people, to me, reflects the desire to be unified with the world. And it's the people are the place where the potential is the greatest, because we're operationally the same at every single level. So I say that to say that the mental picture lies stretched. The mental imagery lies stretched, say, as a provisional placeholder between mere conceptual life and mere perceptual life. It lies stretched there, and that it itself is lying in potentia as that which is stretched between the two.
So,
and it can't live unless it has a flow that goes through it. It lives by the virtue of by virtue of the relationship, the tension between percept and concept. And eventually, if it were unified, it would go away. We would need a mediating factor. But it becoming more through this process, I think that I'm describing, is it's becoming less and less mediated, and more part of the individuation process that is standing between the tension between percept and concept.
So, and that's, whilst you were describing that, and again, I'm feeling myself agree with everything you're describing there. I wonder if it's this concept of intuition / intuitive thinking, which is part of the title, or at least it's like the version that I'm reading, is a key aspect that we need to understand better how we experience it, what we think it might be, because it's only in the last 2 chapters that he's actually started talking about intuition. If I'm correct, it's not even mentioned until chapter 5. It's like we're not ready for it, but we haven't really, and he hasn't gone. I mean, in this chapter, he just like flings it in there. So like intuition and concept as if they're equivalent. And the only other time he mentions it in chapter 5 is when he makes the statement, intuition is to thinking as observation is to perception. And again, okay, so what's this intuition? So what I'm thinking is that I need to do a lot more homework. I'm going to go, I'm going to really dig around in GA1 and 2 especially, because one of the things that I've discovered in I've been listening to them, Dale Brunswald, as I'm sure most of us do, because you can do the cooking whilst you're you can do all these things that you have to do whilst you're like feeding your mind with this amazing content. But one of the things I've noticed that in both of these books, he's unpacking so many things. They're just chucked in here in The Philosophy of Freedom. But you realize there's a whole rich world of thinking. And this, more importantly, that's a judgmental. From my perspective, in an enriching way, they help me to understand how a lot of this isn't something that Steiner has just come up with. He is feeding into the whole of German idealism. He's synthesizing, he's reasoning. He's synthesizing all of these ideas into this amazing whole. And intuition is something that Kant tried to grapple with. And he describes that in, as I said, I can't remember whether GA1 or 2. But I think what we could do, if I've got a little bit of artwork, so like just to wrap up here, but perhaps next conversation, because next chapter is a really short one, perhaps we can come back to where are we both on this intuition question? Because I think my intuition, whatever the hell it is, says that it might be it's like there in the background that's like creating the lack of clarity that either one of us have or both of us have, and as to why we're not like having this crystal clear picture in front of us of what is going on, or we're not able to communicate it to each other. Well, how does that sound?
Sounds great. I think partly we're reflecting the content of the chapter, which is an attempt to resolve the duality, and the next chapter is about duality. Right. It's about a lot of things, but it starts off speaking about dualism and the problems of dualism as a broader, like it's incorporative of all sorts of things.
I haven't even started reading it. I thought it was just about the limits to cognition, but it's dualism's making its comeback here, is it?
Yeah, well, it's really stated as such in this chapter, as opposed to versions of it like critical idealism is dualism, and well, in all just about everything is dualism that it skirts thinking, because it makes the subject object absolute divide absolute. It has no resolution for the subject object divide, which is what we're doing. We're grappling with this, and I think that we'll find more clarity as also the process of the work goes, because again, chapter 12 to me has in my most recent reading before this was like, that's all I needed was chapter 12. Chapter 12 contains everything you need in the way in which he deals with evolution, and the role that moral imagination plays in basically in the evolutionary process. And moral imagination is in that chapter an extension of the mental picturing, I would suggest. So
and perhaps that's why you've got greater clarity on it than I have. Again, I've really
all right. I don't. Yeah, I'm not claiming greater clarity. There's no way.
Is it?
I don't think we're that. I think there's just a very thin hair between us.
Yeah. Just a reflection on our process, which after we finish, there's something I'd like to share with you. But I think this is an extremely time compressed process that we're doing here. There's so much content in each one of these chapters, and there's there's a part of me that's like, there's a part of me that would like to slow down the process and really pull it. It's like where one video is just looking at like one page. What are we seeing? What are we doing there with the text in front of us? But perhaps that could be something for some future. We'll carry on in this tact, but this is where the nuances get teased out when you actually have the text in front of you and say what's going on here, and you have like two minds like asking questions, saying what's going on.
Yeah, that would be a book group, and it would be a necessity to be a small book group, because you wouldn't be able to get very far in that process that you're describing. I think our book group that we're working with Matt and Ashton is fantastic, and I think it's contributing quite a bit. But this is different. What we're doing here, process-wise, is something that makes it more available for more people to see what one might be grappling with if one took up this as a spiritual exercise. And I've also, speaking of two minds, I just add this, and I know you want to get to the artwork, but the two minds that I'm of is that a very, very, very close reading has been very beneficial, but I've also witnessing how the close reading in myself and other people can allow you to miss the forest, and get stuck in like I mentioned last time, a snowplow that's not designed to shed the snow as it goes, but just to keep it accumulating and accumulating it. So yeah. But I've enjoyed both of these processes, and I've read it both ways. But there's a narrative flow that it's possible to miss, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a rich book. So I bought a little piece of artwork with me. Where am I? Here.
Okay, well, you do that. I'm gonna step off for a minute.
Okay, sure. There's a guy called Mishka, and he's a Georgian guy who's created an exhibition. I believe it was in 2019 in Berlin, and I'm going to be speaking to him and hopefully start some dialoguing with him. That remains to be seen. But in this project, what he did is he took some of the key ideas. Let me see if I've got it. I had problems with okay, I can't find it right at the moment. He asked youngsters to do sketches from some of the ideas that pop out of reading The Philosophy of Freedom, but it was a different title that he gave this exhibition. It wasn't strictly The Philosophy of Freedom. Was it just about knowing the world or something like that? So he's in this exhibition. These are like children's drawings inspired by some of the key ideas that come out of a closer reading of Steiner's way of viewing the world. And this was one picture drawn by a kid, and I'll just translate it here. So, well, I've actually already translated it, haven't I? I can see that now. Not all movement is a result of free will. And the simplicity of the drawing of the rain falling down and the apples falling off the tree, but then the human being free in the middle throwing himself on the ground, has got a simplicity to it that I find beautifully appealing, and it's a testimony to the creativity that all of us can possess as we try to manage these deeply human questions that we confront when we're reading this type of literature from Steiner. So anyway, I'm going to be speaking to this guy, and I'll say more information about that once I know more. We've been in contact before. We spoke before last year, but there was a break from my side in the communication there. But things could be happening on that front as well. So yeah, that was my little piece of artwork to share with the world this week.
It is beautiful, simplistic, simple and beautiful.
Yeah.
Sorry I had stepped away, but what is that? The freehand writing say up on top?
Free beschließen, free decision making instead of free necessity. So he's playing with the Spinozan idea of free necessity. We can't see what's written above. But the last bit, this free necessity, is obviously something that has been playing on the mind of this youngster, or they've tried to entertain it, this idea playfully. And then the bottom is like Freiheit des Fallens als Notwendigkeit, so the freedom of falling as a necessity. So that's what it's saying. So like a tree has to shed its apples, the apples have to fall, rain has to fall, but human beings don't.
But we do.
Stand up.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, let's press end there. I'll just press end recording.
Okay.